Precis, då ska vi byta till engelska. So we'll switch to English to talk to Ekaterina Tarasova, who is a postdoc researcher at Linköpings universitet and who has been part of the SamspEL research project Smarta elnät, framtidens elnät för alla, or in short in English, smart grids for all. After which we will talk to the three previous panelists together with Ekaterina. But first, welcome, Ekaterina.
Hello, and thank you.
Thanks for speaking to us. First of all, I'd like to ask you if you can tell us about the goal and the key research questions of this project.
Yes, I can say that the project is already formally completed. It started in 2017 and it has finished last autumn in September. It is a project that is carried out by Department of Thematic Studies at Linköping University in collaboration with Umicon, IT consultancy company. The project departed from the observation that in the visions of smart grids, there is often a focus on the role of households and end users and consumers. And they are expected to become more active and engaged and to have a technological interest, to be interested, to be motivated economically to take part in smart grids. And at the same time, we can see that not all consumers, not all households would fit these descriptions. So the idea behind the project is to understand who and in what way can become marginalized and become vulnerable in smart grids. So, that led us to the three research questions. First of all, to identify what kind of social groups can become marginalized or vulnerable in smart grids, then to identify barriers that prevent them from participating in smart grids. And the third one is to develop strategies to make smart grids more inclusive.
That was a really good description of the project. So I'm curious now to find out, what groups did you find that were marginalized or potentially marginalized?
Yes, I can say that we started with a literature review. And when the project started, there was quite a few studies, and now it has developed. There's more studies coming in this area. And we can see that the list is quite broad, and I think that's very important to pay attention to, because it includes a very diverse social groups, such as it can be low-income households, elderly, people living in rural areas, families with kids, people with diverse health conditions, immigrants, and so on. So this is not even a complete list. But what is more important is that we have found out that it is really not so productive to talk about these groups in social demographic characteristics, because these groups are very heterogeneous and very far from everyone in these groups could become marginalized or vulnerable. So it's more important to focus on conditions and circumstances, such as, for instance, limited digital skills or low economic capacity to buy smart energy products and services, than to focus them as on the group. Because on the one side, these groups are very broad, and on the other side, some people that are that could have become part of this group, that are part of these groups in several ways. For instance, elderly living in the rural areas, in low-income households, can be affected much more than others. So we need to focus on a more nuanced picture of these groups, I would say.
And can you give some examples on the strategies that you found to address this marginalization?
Well, first of all, to to do a more targeted measures or actions when smart grids will be rolled out for these groups that can become very marginalized. Because again, linking to this heterogeneity of these groups, they don't need to be. There shouldn't be measures that concern the whole groups, but the targeting groups that are very affected, and also generally to diversify the idea of who is this vulnerable group, who can become. What kind of groups are affected? What kind of groups are part of smart grids? What kind of households are taking part in smart grids? To diversify the social groups in smart grid development. That's what is important to do.
Understand. And I think, as I said to Cajsa previously, that many of us are, or at least I am, more familiar perhaps with more technical projects, but how have you gone about to research this?
Well, first of all, it has been two broad questions. First of all, how to study marginalization and vulnerability, and the second one of all, how to conceptualize the social groups. And to do this, we have done the extensive literature review, and we have gone through diverse approaches that can give us an idea what can become a source of or dimension of marginalization. And then we have conducted the interview studies with two groups, and that was the energy sector, energy companies, authorities that work with energy questions. And the second group was interest organizations that work with social groups that can become vulnerable or marginalized. And also we have done one focus group with one electricity consumer group.
And I think it's interesting, a question that perhaps is feeding a little bit into the panel discussion that we will have, but this project has been going on between 2017 and last year. So I think quite a lot of things have happened, both when it comes to smart grid technology and the world we're living in. Have you found perhaps that the research questions or the answers have developed during the project? And perhaps not the research questions, but the answers, have they changed during the project somehow?
Well, I wouldn't say that they changed. They have developed throughout the project. I think what is interesting is that it seems now that the discourse on the important role of households have changed a bit. And now there is less focus on active consumers, but maybe more on automatized solutions. But I think even if this, I don't know what is the future development, but if it's going in that direction, I think it's still important to focus on diversity of needs and interests of users, that they are studied on the level of development of these automatized solutions.
And then a final question before we move on to the panel. Have you identified any new research questions that you will work on from here, or that somebody could work on?
I think it's important, something that that is important to study is to look more into how these diverse groups themselves, how households with diverse conditions and circumstances, how they think about smart energy products and services, and particularly these groups that we think can become more affected. Because as what I can see from our focus groups, they can become also less interested or more interested in this. And this is definitely something that needs to be researched more.
Thank you, Ekaterina. And from here, we will move on to a panel discussion with Cajsa, Mats, and Jesper. Here we have all five of us. So I would like to ask you, Mats, Jesper, and Cajsa, what your reflections are on how different groups in society are affected or benefit differently from the energy transition or smart grid technology. I don't know if some of you wants to start reflecting. Mats looks ready.
Always ready. No, I think, just as we said earlier, it's the overall awareness is of course depending on how much you care So if you don't care whatsoever, of course, things will happen left and right. But if you care, if you are involved, then there should be information. There should be sources where you can get more information, get educated. So that's probably number one. But when we talk about smart grid, it's like it's a very, very wide concept that branches down to a lot of the small, like sustainability, branches down to a lot of active steps and active decisions. So I guess what we have to look at as a company providing technologies to be as relevant as we can, both functional wise and financially, but also being very clear about that our product is more aimed for a future of energy transition than anything else. There is no help for anyone to complain about things how they are now and they used to be better. It's a waste of time. We can learn from it, but when we go ahead, we have to look at solutions. How can we change our ways to enable a smarter grid? Well, in a lot of cases, it's a smarter house, a smarter electrical system in my villa, a smarter electrical system, more interactions with Krafthem and stuff like that in our BRF. Be a part and influence your BRF chairman. Say, I want to our BRF to be more engaged in these questions. I think that's where you have to start.
Thank you, Mats. And I will move on to Jesper. Have you come upon this question about the possibility of different groups or users to use your technology?
Not a lot, but I agree with most of what Mats said, and I think it's a lot is just about educating all parties, even if it's the end consumer or businesses, to how we can be a part of a smarter and better electricity system. Because I think it's been a commodity for at least for me and for a lot of people and companies that electricity, at least here in the Nordics, is something that we all take for granted.
Thank you, Jesper. And what about you, Cajsa? What reflections did you make when listening to Ekaterina?
Well, thank you, Ekaterina. It was very interesting. I have no, well, at least close to none experience from my own research. I only have a newly started project in this particular area, but with a focus on energy communities. And I would absolutely like to talk to you more about this sometime. But maybe I can add some personal reflections. When it comes to technology, as much as it is a solution, it is possibly to some extent also a barrier in some instances. My reflection is that when we are looking for respondents that are in areas that are technically oriented, like electric vehicles and prosumers, it's extremely hard to find women that are prepared to do this. And I'm not sure why, but they most often want to forward us to their husbands. That's his area, and so on. And I think that may possibly be a barrier also when it comes to the spread of this kind of technology. This is not a research result, but a personal reflection.
That's really interesting, and I thought perhaps I would. What are you thinking when you hear Cajsa's reflections, Ekaterina? Is the gender aspect something that you come upon in your research?
Not really gender aspects, but I think all kind of. I can see. I can see that there's different characteristics, not only gender, but maybe also age and different competences and conditions, how people live, like is it a house or is it an apartment? All of this can play a role. And we have heard very similar ideas from our respondents about engagement of different groups. And I think it's definitely something to look at closely and maybe to focus more and to mainstream it in future research, how to engage these different groups and what kind of mechanisms can be used to engage other kind of groups than the ones that are already involved.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would like to. I mean, we are currently in a quite special and tragic situation when it comes to what's happening globally, and it's affecting energy prices, which I think makes this question of how the transition and different technologies, how they sort of benefit or impact people differently, is very actualized today. So I'm curious to hear, Mats or Jesper, perhaps, have you seen any change in the appetite for your products or since these last months?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's or maybe not 100% but if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
No, it's been a drastic, but it started already. I would say the awareness started through the pandemic when people realized that I can't take certain things for granted. And me, for instance, I used the curves that we used to see Anders Tegnell show, flatten the curve, because we have to take care of the resources we have in hospitals and so on. I use that quite a lot to explain that's really what we are talking about when it's about electricity. Flatten the curve, remove power peaks. But then when we exited out of pandemic and this thing happened, I can't tell you how many that call us every week and ask for the urgency for having backup functionality for our batteries, which is one of the things that we postponed in our development stage in our plan, because we saw that we had a pretty good electric grid and we have lots of things to do. Now we have to bump it up, so to say, in our priority. So people feel insecure, and that functionality of being safe, have electricity is definitely skyrocketing right now.
Jesper, have you had any similar experiences?
Yeah, we've also seen an increasing amount of interest in all the solutions that we provide to the different asset owners and companies, for sure.
And may I also then add, in regards to what Cajsa said, I have quite a lot of women contacting us about this backup functionality compared to other functionalities, for some reason. Because they are not necessarily interested in the car charger or the other one, but it's either the man that is calling in and having the technical responsibility, so to say, to make the purchase and evaluation, but he quite often referred to the wife or the woman in the house as being concerned about this function, which we call backup. So I think we have different roles here and we have different priorities. And we should honor that, and so it's dramatic what we see, and it's our responsibility also as technical development to make it possible to move in the direction where we are more sustainable for the electric grid, but also more protected. We own our own situation to a greater extent. We can't take the electric grid for granted anymore.
Thank you, Mats. And I would like to just first remind the audience, if somebody has a question, you have about 3 minutes to pass it on to me so I can pass it on to these smart people. But then I think it would also be interesting to hear perhaps Cajsa's or Ekaterina's thoughts on, I mean, we've seen quite direct measures from the government to address these high fuel prices and electricity prices. Do any of you, perhaps Ekaterina, have any thoughts of how other types of long-term measures to address the cost for consumers, but that perhaps could accelerate or push the transition to a sustainable energy system in the long term?
Well, if you ask me, I think we should take the deregulation of our energy market to the next level and maybe finish this project and introduce transparency all the way to the end customers, and abolish all flat rates and so on. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I was just processing the English and translating it to Swedish in my head. And what about you, Ekaterina? I saw that you also were about to say something.
Yes, I'm thinking that to develop strategies for future sustainable energy system, we need to understand this diversity of interests and needs more. And one of the ways to develop strategies is to focus on social sustainability and inclusion. That's what we have done in the project. But I believe that there is a need for more research in the same direction, focusing on the diversity and social sustainability in energy transitions.
Thank you. And I will actually, ask you a last question, Ekaterina, before we go on to the break. And I'm a little bit curious. At least in my perception, there's been more focus on this inclusion discussion when it comes to energy in, for example, the UK or the US. Or have you made any reflections on why perhaps this discussion hasn't been as loud in Sweden?
That's actually a very good question. I don't think that I can answer to this right now. I think it depends on diversity or differences in terms of how the electricity sector is constructed. For instance, how maybe I would think about how the electricity billing is constructed, and I think there is what we have seen is that there is much less focus on energy poverty in Swedish context, and that is and that's quite a difference if we compare it to the UK or US context.
Thank you, Ekaterina. And we have to round off here, but thanks all of you for sharing your perspectives, and good luck with all your continued research and work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then we will take a break for 10 minutes, and we'll start the next session, which will be in Swedish at 2:10. So welcome back then.